Hi community of awesome, I'm Ava J and this is Bookish Pixie. So one of the suggestions you guys had for me to vlog about was to talk about writing book endings, which is great because I love writing book endings. Yay. Right. So book endings for me are often the scariest and hardest part of the writing and plotting process. In plotting, it freaks me out because I usually start with the inciting incident, which is the event that kicks off the rest of the book, and then from there I don't usually have any idea about how it's going to end until I've reached almost the end of the plotting process and I've plotted out everything else, and even then it usually takes me a while to fill out those last few scene cards and figure out how the book is going to end because there's a lot of pressure with the ending. I read this quote in a writing book a while ago and I don't remember exactly which writing book it was, but if I remember I will tell you guys below. But basically it said that your first sentence sells your first book and your last sentence sells your next book. And that's a lot of pressure to put on the ending of your book, but it's kind of true. You can have this really awesome book that you totally love, but then if you hate the ending, it can sort of ruin the experience for you. And it's knowledge like that that kind of freaks me out when I'm trying to write a good book ending because it's hard to figure out what makes it good. To me, figuring out how the book ends is kind of the final test. When I'm plotting, it's a test as to whether or not I've actually got a full plot. And when I'm drafting, it's kind of the same as to whether or not I made it to the end, but also whether or not I think the book is any good. Granted, when you're writing the first draft, you do not need to get the ending right the first time. I know I certainly don't, at least not every time, so that helps. But it's still a really scary part of the writing process to me, and when I'm reaching it in a first draft, I usually dread it a lot. That said, I figured out 3 general elements that are usually in a good ending. The first is that the main problem and antagonist are addressed. This doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is solved and the antagonist is defeated and there's a happily ever after ending. Sometimes books end badly and that's okay as long as the problem was tackled and there was a clash with the antagonist and, well, sometimes the antagonist wins. Or, more frequently, the problem is solved and the antagonist is defeated. How you end your book is up to you, but there needs to be some sort of attempt to tackle the problem and a clash with the antagonist and some sort of resolution. Second, tied up loose ends. Whether you end your book on a high note or a low note, there can't be any unresolved plot threads. What this means is all of your subplots need to be addressed and everything needs to tie neatly together. The reader shouldn't be left with any major questions at the end, and this definitely applies to books with sequels. In essence, every novel should be able to stand by itself as a complete story. 3 completed character arcs. If your characters are dynamic, that is, that they change throughout the book, then they need to have a full arc from beginning to end. How they are at the beginning of the novel before the story starts should not be the same as how they are at the end. Unless, of course, they're static characters, which is a choice but needs to be a deliberate one. Most of the time, your protagonists and love interests and major characters are dynamic though, so you need to be thinking about how they're changing throughout the novel. The story isn't just a story, it's your characters' lives, and you need to think about how the plot affects them. And as a bonus, but not a requirement, there's sometimes a full circle field, which is often called bookends. Basically, this is when something in the ending calls back to something in the opening. There are a lot of examples of this. In the Grisha trilogy by Leigh Bardugo, for example, every book starts and ends with a prologue and epilogue that's told in third person, and they call back to each other. Often this is done with a repeated image or motif or line. How you do it, or if you do it at all, is totally up to you, but it gives a really nice full circle feel of closure. That's all I got for today. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe and comment, and I'll see you guys next week.